Today, peddling the housing supply myth again. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, where latest post covering finance and property news. Well, housing in Australia is in crisis. It's too expensive, and relative to population, there is just not enough of it. As I discussed with independent journalist Tarric Brooker last week, though shockingly, we have built more homes per 100,000 people than Canada, the US or the UK. In other words, we have a greater proportion of our economy dedicated already to housing construction, with perhaps 1.35 million people working in the sector. And we also know completion times are blowing out now, thanks to poor supply chains, lack of available labour, and poor quality construction. And in fact, in New South Wales, around half of new high-rise projects have severe defects. But the government wants to push the supply side levers some more, exemplified in their attachment to the budget papers, Statement 4, meeting Australia's housing challenge from the Treasury. It starts out, Australia has a housing shortage. There are not enough homes being built in the right areas to meet the needs of our communities. This statement focuses on the reasons for the current undersupply of housing, how it affects affordability, and the changes required to more quickly unlock supply to meet the housing needs of all Australians. It also sets out how the government's policy responds to these drivers of undersupply. This undersupply, they say, accounts for the increases in rents, mortgage repayments, and house prices. The Treasury research shows that the supply of new homes in Australia is falling even further behind the rest of the world. The nation ranks 23rd out of 33 developed countries for the number of dwellings per 1,000 people, according to figures from the OECD. While differences across OECD countries reflect a range of factors, including differences in age structure, population growth, cultural norms, and the size and quality of the housing stock, Australia, they say, has fewer dwellings per 1,000 people than the OECD average. According to the OECD, Australia's level of housing supply was at 403 per 1,000 people in 2011. This increased to 420 per 1,000 people in 2022. However, this increase in supply was insufficient to keep pace with international peers, falling from around 92% of the OECD average in 2011 to 90% of the OECD average in 2022. And they go on to say that Australia lags behind other countries like Canada, the US and the UK in terms of dwellings per 1,000 people. Australia's dwellings per 1,000 people fell from 92% of the OECD average to 90% over the decade. Australia lags behind other countries like Canada, the US and the UK in terms of dwellings per 1,000 people, the Treasury said. But hey, Australia was ahead of countries such as Costa Rica, Chile, Colombia, Poland, and the Slovak Republic. But of course, what they are doing here is looking at the migration growth relative to the supply of housing. So it's not surprising that we're falling down the list, but we should not assume that this is simply a supply problem. The Treasury says, though, that the lag of housing supply responding to the changes in population has contributed to rising house prices and worsening affordability, and they show that nominal dwelling prices and advertised rents have more than doubled since the mid-2000s. As a result of price pressures, an increasing share of household incomes are going towards housing and housing services, particularly for lower-income rental households, with marked growth since 2020. For prospective home buyers, the portion of income needed to service a new loan has risen from an average of 29% in 2020 to 46% in 2023, and this is above the long-run average of 35.7% and above the 30% threshold for mortgage stress. And they go on to say that in the March quarter of 2002, the median house price was 4.9 times the median gross disposable household income. But by the March quarter of 2024, this had increased to 8.6 times median gross annual income. And the unit price to income ratio has not grown as fast, reflecting recent growth in the supply of medium density housing and rising land values, as medium high density developments contain more dwellings per square metre of land. While there has been short-term volatility, Australians are also taking longer to save for a deposit, they say, with the time taken to save a 20% house deposit reaching almost 11.4 years in the March quarter of 2024. That's down from a historic peak of 12.1 years in the March quarter of 2022. These factors have contributed to declining rates of home ownership over the time, and more people now renting. Rental listings have declined from about 175,000 homes to less than 100,000 over the same period. Rents will remain elevated, though, for the next 2 years, adding to pressure on broader inflation. And the Reserve Bank of Australia's interest rate policies, according to the investment bank Jarden in the new report. And as reported in AFR, the rental crisis is far from over. A combination of factors, including rebounding migration, record low rental vacancies, subdued dwelling investments, and strong income growth, has seen market rents rise at the fastest pace in decades and up 30% since 2019, according to Jarden. Looking forward, though, they expect the rental market to remain tight in the near term, and they forecast rents to grow 8.5% in 2024 and 4.3% in 2025. With rents the second largest item in the CPI, the Consumer Price Index basket, this is likely to maintain upward pressure on inflation and will likely remain a challenge for the RBA as it seeks to bring inflation back to its 2 to 3% target. An SQM research property analyst Louis Christopher said that the rental crisis is still far from over. The national rental vacancy rate was 1.1% in April, SQM research reports. The rental vacancy rate is well below the rate considered to be reflecting a balanced rental market of around 3%, according to the Treasury. In some parts of the country, including some capital cities, it's as low as 0.5%. Now, the Treasury acknowledges that Australia's lower rate of home for population is partly explained by historical preference to live in larger standalone houses with a backyard compared to apartments, which are more common in Europe. But they say that Australia's housing system has been too slow to respond to demand. The cause of this are multifaceted, they say. It's complex and affects all stages of the housing construction process, including all levels of government and industry. Planning and zoning and land release practices are often slow and not effectively factored into urgent need for housing in suburban areas. So Treasury says average times for the approval of development applications varies by state, with Victoria and New South Wales experiencing the longest waiting times earlier this month of 144 and 114 days, respectively. But Treasury says that completion times for apartments, townhouses and detached houses actually worsened by 39%, 34% and 42% respectively over the 10 years to June 2023. Industry's capacity to add new supply has been hampered by a lack of essential infrastructure in greenfield developments, a critical shortage of skilled labour, and falling productivity in the sector. At the same time, there has been a long-term chronic underinvestment in social housing. Fixing supply and improving affordability will require concerted, cooperative and substantive efforts from all levels of government. The government has a plan to increase supply, fund more social homes, better support renters, provide a pathway to home ownership, and double its dedicated funding for homelessness services. In recognition of the national leadership needed to address Australia's housing supply challenges, the government agreed with states, local government, industry and investors to deliver 1.2 million new, well-located homes in the 5 years to the 30th of June 2029 through the National Housing Accord. This is being supported by $3 billion worth in incentive payments to the states and other investments. This substantial commitment would be the equivalent of adding a city around the size of Brisbane to Australia's housing supply, they say. More homes need to be built in the places where households need them, including close to places of work and education for families, workers and students. This requires careful planning and better collaboration with non-government partners to meet the changing needs of our communities. Australia's growing international education sector requires adequate supply of purpose-built student accommodation to ensure its ongoing sustainability, to deliver more accommodation for students and to reduce pressure on the private rental market. The government will work with the higher education sector to develop regulations that require universities to increase their supply of student accommodation. And the government is also developing the National Housing and Homelessness Plan. The plan will be a 10-year strategy and will outline how all levels of government can work together with the private and the community sector to deliver the short, medium and long-term actions needed. And the plan will build on the accord where the government is working with states and territories, local governments, industry and investors to deliver those 1.2 million new well-located dwellings in the 5 years from 1 July 2024. They say that new homes are needed in every state and territory, not just in the major population centres which attract most of the population growth. That's why the government is offering $3 billion in incentive payments through the New Homes Bonus to be shared amongst all states and territories to reach their share of the 1.2 million target. And the government will provide state, territory and local government with payments to fund the enabling infrastructure, water and sewage connections, road and footpaths needed to develop new homes through the $1.5 billion housing support program. And they also recognise that social housing, which has declined in recent years, needs to help too. So they list a range of potential measures to reverse that trend, with investments expected to support around 55,000 new social and affordable homes, increasing the stock of social and affordable housing by around 12%. Now, of course, talk is cheap, but the question is, will this translate to real actions? Remember that 1.2 million target, many in the industry say, is impossible. And remember Tarric's point about the fact that we are already building more relative to other countries when you actually look at what's going on the ground. And what about the elephant in the room? Because, of course, the focus should be to curtail migration from its very high current levels and bring demand back closer to long-term averages. And over the budget period, both sides of politics have, to a degree, been talking about this. Although, as I discussed in my recent show, The Migration Question Amplified but Not Tackled by Anyone, it's a battle of announceables, with numbers being bandied about. But my take is that neither side of politics are really wanting to take this migration question on seriously, despite the direct link to higher inflation and the housing issue. The result of all this is that we're going to hear an awful lot about initiatives to address the supply of housing, while the truth is that the demand side is not really in focus as it should be. And the net result of all this is that we will see higher inflation for longer, requiring higher interest rates than otherwise needed. So we need more joined-up thinking here. This Treasury report is okay as far as it goes, but unfortunately doesn't bridge to the demand side, where in fact many of the levers are more readily achievable if there was political will. Now, if you're buying your home in Sydney's contentious market, you don't need to stand alone. This is the time you need to have Edwin Almeida from Ribbon Property Consultants standing alongside you. Buying a property is both challenging and adversarial. The vendor has a professional on their side. Emotions run high, price discovery and price transparency are hard to find, and then there's the wasted time and financial investments that you make. Edwin understands your needs, so why not engage a licensed professional to stand alongside you? With RPC, you know you have experience, knowledge, and master negotiators looking after your best interests. So shoot Ribbon an email at info@ribbonproperty.com.au, and if you use the promo code DFAWTW/Martin, you can get a 10% discount offer. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.